The first time someone whispered, "Don't," someone might see. It wasn't shouted or dramatic or meant to become legend. It was said low and sharp, behind a cupped hand on a dusty morning when the sun was barely crawling. Over the hills in the town of Briar, Hollow was still pretending to sleep. And the man it was meant for, Caleb Rourke, third-generation rancher, quiet as fence wire and twice as stubborn, heard it clearly and chose to ignore it because Caleb had spent his entire life learning the difference between fear that protects you and fear that cages you. And this, whatever it was, felt like the latter. Caleb's ranch sat just outside town, a spread of dry grass, old oaks and weather-beaten. Barns that looked like they'd been standing since the earth first. Learned how to crack. People in Briar Hollow liked to say the Rourkes were part of the land, not owners of it, and there was truth in that. Caleb's grandfather had broken his back building those fences. His father had broken his spirit trying to keep the ranch alive when the meat prices collapsed, and Caleb had broken his silence when he decided that some things were worth being seen for. But the town didn't know that yet. All they knew was that something strange was happening out on the Rourke land, something that made folks slow their trucks when they passed, something that made women pull their children closer and men clear their throats like they wanted to speak but didn't dare. It started small, as these things always do, with a single fence panel removed near the old East Road, the one nobody used anymore because it cut too close to the creek where the water had gone. Bad years ago, someone noticed it missing. Someone else noticed what replaced it, a long wooden sign freshly cut. The letters burned deep and dark into the plank. "This land remembers." No explanation. No name, just that. By noon, the sign was the only thing anyone could talk about. By sunset, it was already a problem. Caleb knew that before the sheriff showed up. Sheriff Dalton Hargreave had been elected 3 times on the strength of his smile and his ability to calm people down without ever really solving anything. And when he pulled into the ranch with his lights off, hat tipped low, Caleb was waiting by the barn, hands dusty, eyes steady. "Caleb," the sheriff said, like he was greeting an old friend instead of stepping into the middle of a storm. "Folks are getting nervous." "Folks get nervous when they don't understand something," Caleb replied. "That don't mean it's wrong." The sheriff glanced toward the sign, swallowed, then looked back. "You know what people are saying." "People always say things," Caleb said. "This time they're listening," Dalton warned. "And they think you're trying to stir something up." Caleb almost laughed at that. Stir something up, as if it hadn't already been boiling for years beneath the surface of Briar Hollow. As if the town hadn't learned to survive by not looking too closely at its own past. "I'm not stirring," Caleb said quietly. "I'm uncovering." Dalton shifted his weight. "Don't. Someone might see," he said, repeating the warning Caleb had already heard, that warning from a passing ranch hand who wouldn't meet his eyes. "That's the point," Caleb replied. And that was the moment the sheriff realized he was too late, because Caleb wasn't acting on impulse. He wasn't angry or drunk or desperate. He was deliberate. And deliberation terrified Briar Hollow more than any kind of madness ever could. The thing was, the land did remember. Caleb had found proof buried where the old cattle dip used to be, where his father had told him never to dig, not because it was dangerous, but because some things stay buried for a reason. As a boy, Caleb had accepted that answer. As a man who'd watched the town cheer when certain families prospered and whisper, when others disappeared, he no longer could. What he found wasn't treasure or bones or gold. It was records. Metal boxes sealed tight, preserved by clay and chance. Names, dates, payments. Quiet. Transactions between men who'd long since had streets named after them. Proof of land stolen, lives ruined, accidents arranged. Proof that Briar Hollow wasn't built on hard work alone, but on silence. And silence was the one thing Caleb refused to keep. So he started with the sign. Then came the markers, small white stakes placed along the creek, each one bearing a single name burned into the wood. People recognized those names. That was the problem. They recognized them too well. Old Mrs. Hanley fainted when she saw her brother's name by the water. The school board demanded a meeting. The pastor preached about forgiveness without once mentioning truth. And everywhere Caleb went, the warning followed him like a shadow. Don't. someone might see, as if seeing were the danger, not the rot that had been hidden for decades. Trucks slowed. Phones came out. Videos were posted. "Rancher loses mind," one caption read. "Man tries to rewrite town history," said another. But views climbed. Comments argued. And suddenly Briar Hollow wasn't just whispering to itself anymore, it was being watched. That was when the whole town really started to panic, because secrets survive best in the dark. And Caleb Rourke was dragging them into the light one name at a time. Standing by his fence that night, listening to the distant hum of engines and voices that no longer bothered to stay quiet, Caleb knew there was no turning back. He also knew that if people were willing to watch, to really see, then maybe the truth stood a chance. And if you're watching this story unfold right now, leaning in because something about it feels real, feels dangerous, feels necessary, then don't look away. Stories like this only matter when someone bears witness. And if you want to see how far one man's refusal to stay silent can push an entire town, make sure you stay with us. Subscribe, because this is only the beginning, and what Briar Hollow does next will shock everyone. By the third day, Briar Hollow stopped pretending this was just a phase, because phases don't draw crowds at sunrise, and they don't make people cancel church to stand along a dirt road staring at white stakes like they might start talking back. Caleb woke before dawn, as he always had, but the air felt different, thick, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. From his porch, he could see headlights lining the east road, engines idling, people sitting inside their trucks as if proximity alone might give them answers, without forcing them to ask the questions they were afraid of. Word had spread fast, faster than Caleb expected, and that alone told him how deep the wound really was. Secrets only move that quickly when everyone already knows them in their bones. The sheriff had called twice the night before. Caleb hadn't answered. Dalton's voice left a message full of careful language and implied consequences, the kind of message meant to sound reasonable, while quietly drawing a line in the dirt. The town council followed with a letter slid under Caleb's door sometime. After midnight, unsigned but unmistakable in tone, "Remove the displays, cease immediately, for your own good." Caleb folded the letter, set it on the table, and poured his coffee without shaking. He had lived his whole life under warnings disguised as concern. He knew fear when he heard it clearing its throat. By the time the sun rose, people were out of their trucks. Someone had brought folding chairs. Someone else had brought a camera on a tripod. When Caleb walked the fence line, checking the stakes, he felt eyes on him like heat. A woman he didn't recognize whispered to her husband, "Don't, someone might see." And the husband snapped back, "That's the point now, isn't it?" The town was fracturing in real time. That scared them more than Caleb ever could. By mid-morning, the first confrontation came, not from officials, but from memory itself. Mrs. Evelyn Hanley made her way down the road alone. No cane, no escort, her back straight despite her age. She stopped at the stake with her brother's name and stared at it for a long time before speaking. "You didn't put a date," she said. "Not yet," Caleb replied. "Why?" "Because people need to remember who before they argue about when." She nodded slowly. "They called it an accident," she said. "All these years." Caleb didn't interrupt. He'd learned that truth breathes better when you don't rush it. "He couldn't swim," she continued. Everyone knew that. But the creek was high, and suddenly he fell in. Funny thing was, the men who pulled him out never looked wet. Her voice didn't break. That was what made the crowd uneasy. Pain they understood. Control terrified them. Someone shouted from the road, "You're reopening old wounds!" Mrs. Hanley turned toward the voice. "They never healed," she said. And just like that, the narrative slipped. No longer was this about a rancher losing his mind. Now it was about whether Briar Hollow had ever truly been sane. The pastor arrived next, collar crisp, expression rehearsed. He spoke of unity, of forgiveness, of letting God handle judgment. Caleb listened, then asked quietly, "Where does truth fit in?" The pastor hesitated a second too long. Cameras caught it. Online, that hesitation looped endlessly, slowed down, dissected. By afternoon, the county sent representatives. By evening, state reporters were calling. And all the while, more stakes appeared, placed carefully, deliberately, Like punctuation marks in a sentence the town could no longer avoid reading. People argued about motive, about legality, about property rights. But beneath all of it was one unspoken fear. If Caleb was right, then the foundation of Briar Hollow wasn't just cracked, it was built on a lie. That night someone tried to burn the sign. Flames licked the edges of the wood but died out, leaving the words blackened yet still legible. This land remembers. Caleb stood there long after the crowd dispersed, smoke drifting into the dark, and felt a strange calm settle over him. They were no longer asking him to stop. They were reacting, and reaction meant momentum. Somewhere, someone was finally listening. If you're still here, still watching this unfold, you already understand why stories like this matter. Truth doesn't shout. It waits for witnesses. And if you want to see what happens when a whole town is forced to choose between silence and reckoning, stay with us. Subscribe, because Chapter 3 is where everything breaks open. The night Briar Hollow finally snapped. It didn't begin with shouting or sirens or fire. It began with a knock, slow, deliberate, on Caleb Rourke's front door, the kind of knock that carries weight because whoever makes it believes they are justified. Caleb didn't look through the window. He already knew. When he opened the door, half the town seemed to be standing there. Faces lit by truck headlights and phone screens. Expressions twisted into something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear, but a volatile mix of both. Sheriff Dalton stood at the front, jaw tight, eyes tired. "Caleb," he said, "we need to talk, now." Caleb stepped aside and let him in, knowing full well the conversation wasn't really meant for the walls of his house. It was meant for history. The living room filled quickly, murmurs rippling through the crowd like nervous static. Someone muttered again, "Don't!" Someone might see, but the words had lost their power. Everyone was already watching. Dalton cleared his throat. "This has gone too far," he said. "Records or not, you don't get to try. People in the court of public opinion." Caleb reached under the table and pulled out the last box, the one he'd saved for this moment. "These aren't opinions," he said calmly, opening it. Inside were signed affidavits, sealed letters, photographs no one had ever meant to be seen. "These are confessions." The room went silent. One by one, names surfaced, names of men still revered, plaques still polished, families still powerful. A councilman's wife collapsed into a chair. A business owner shouted denial too loudly. Dalton's face drained, of color as he recognized his own. Father's signature on one of the pages. The truth had teeth, and it was biting everyone equally. Outside, the crowd grew restless as word spread through text messages and live streams. Briar Hollow wasn't just exposed, it was unmasked. State investigators arrived before dawn. By noon, arrests were made. By evening, monuments were boarded up. The town that had survived by not looking finally had no choice but to see. Caleb stood alone by the fence as the last camera packed up. The stakes still standing. No longer symbols of madness, but markers of accountability. He didn't feel victorious. He felt finished. Like a man who'd carried something heavy for too long and finally set it down. Briar Hollow would never be the same. Maybe that was the point. And if this story held you, unsettled you, made you uncomfortable in the right way, then remember this: silence only survives when stories go untold. Subscribe to this channel, stay with us, and keep watching, because there are more truths like this waiting to be seen, and someone has to be brave enough to tell them.